My cousin Ethan and I had been camping together since we were kids. It was our way of escaping the stress of everyday life, just us, the trees, and the open sky. We knew the rules: respect nature, don't leave food out, and most importantly, be aware of your surroundings. But nothing prepared us for what happened that night. We set up camp in a remote area of the Appalachian woods, deep enough that we wouldn't see another person for miles. The hike-in was brutal: dense trees, uneven ground, the kind of place you had to want to be. But that's what we loved. By sunset, we had a fire going, steaks sizzling on the grill, and a couple of beers cracked open. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. The usual sounds of the forest, crickets, rustling leaves, seemed muted, distant. Ethan noticed it too. He turned the music down. "It's weirdly quiet, huh?" I nodded but shrugged it off. Probably just the wind picking up. It wasn't. After dinner, we sat by the fire, talking about work, relationships, the usual. Ethan pulled out a deck of cards, and we got lost in a game of rummy. That's when we heard it. A soft whistling. It came from beyond the trees, slow, deliberate, like someone was signaling. We froze. Listened. The fire crackled between us. Ethan turned his head toward the sound. "You hear that?" Before I could answer, a branch snapped nearby. We both jumped up, scanning the darkness. The fire's glow didn't reach far, and my flashlight barely pierced the blackness. "Probably an animal," Ethan muttered, but he didn't sound convinced. We sat back down, uneasy. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. No more sounds. We told ourselves we were being paranoid, that the silence was just getting to us. Then, right when we started to relax, something landed in the middle of our campsite. A stone. It didn't roll. It dropped. Someone had thrown it. Ethan stood up, shining his flashlight in the direction it came from. "All right, who's out there?" His voice was calm and controlled. "Nothing." I grabbed the hatchet from my bag and held it close. "We should go." Ethan shook his head. "Not in the dark. That's how people get lost." He was right. We had to wait until dawn. We agreed to take turns keeping watch. Ethan stayed up first, sitting by the fire, book in hand. I crawled into my tent, gripping my knife under the sleeping bag. I don't know how long I was asleep before I woke up to movement. Something brushed against my tent. I held my breath, heart hammering. The sound was slow, deliberate, like fingers tracing the fabric. I whispered, "Ethan?" No response. I reached for the zipper, but before I could open it, the whistling started again, right outside my tent. I bolted upright, eyes wide. Then, the zipper began to move. Something was opening my tent from the outside. I panicked, grabbed my knife, and lunged forward, shoving against whatever was there. The tent collapsed as I tumbled out, gasping. Ethan was already up, bear spray in one hand, flashlight in the other. What the hell? I spun around, expecting to see something. There was nothing. The fire had burned low, barely casting enough light to see a few feet ahead. But then Ethan's flashlight landed on something. Footprints, leading right up to my tent. Bare footprints. Human, but wrong. The toes were too long, almost clawed. The steps weren't deep enough, like whatever made them was unnaturally light. Neither of us said a word. We just grabbed our stuff and ran. No looking back. No stopping. Just running. When we reached the truck, Ethan locked the doors, and we sat there, breathing hard, staring into the dark trees. Then, just as I started the engine, we saw it. A figure, standing just beyond the tree line. Tall, unmoving, watching. And then, it whistled. I floored it. We never went back. We never spoke about it. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I swear, I can still hear that whistling. Story 2. I always believed that some places were better left alone, where nature and time had woven secrets into the very soil. So when my friend Mira suggested a getaway to a long-forgotten cabin deep in the woods, I hesitated, but my curiosity won out. The cabin lay on the outskirts of a dense pine forest in northern Vermont, abandoned for decades, its history whispered about in local lore. Mira insisted that a night or two there would be just the break we needed from the relentless hum of modern life. The drive was quiet, the roads winding through misty hills and clusters of towering trees. By late afternoon, we arrived at the clearing where the cabin sat, its weathered wooden siding barely holding together. An eerie stillness blanketed the area, broken only by the rustling of dead leaves. As we approached, the building loomed like a slumbering beast, its broken windows resembling blind eyes that had witnessed unspeakable secrets. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memories. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls and creaking floorboards underfoot told the story of years of neglect. Mira and I set up our small campsite in the cabin's only living area, lighting a few candles to push back the oppressive glow. We planned to spend the night sharing stories, maybe even exploring the surroundings once darkness fell completely. As twilight deepened, a heavy silence settled over the cabin. We sat around a makeshift table, our voices hushed as we recounted local legends. Mira spoke of a long-forgotten tragedy, a family that had vanished without a trace in this very house, leaving behind whispers of betrayal and sorrow. I listened, the words stirring something primal within me, a mixture of dread and fascination. Outside, a slow wind picked up, rattling the loose window panes and stirring the dead leaves into a frenzied dance. After dinner, I decided to take a short walk around the cabin to get some fresh air. The forest beyond was a maze of towering pines and shadowed trails. With only a flashlight to guide me, I ventured a few hundred yards before returning, feeling as if unseen eyes were following my every step. I tried to shrug off the sensation when I reached the cabin again, but an unsettling chill clung to my skin. That night, as the wind howled like distant voices and the old structure groaned under the weight of its history, I lay in a creaky bed with Mira sleeping soundly in the room adjacent to mine. I found sleep elusive, haunted by intermittent sounds, a quiet scraping at the door, soft footsteps in the corridor. At one point, I woke to a faint melody, a lullaby that I couldn't place. It was gentle yet sorrowful, as if sung by someone yearning for a lost past. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to catch any other sound. But nothing more came, and I eventually drifted back to a fitful sleep. In the early hours of the morning, I was awoken by a soft tapping at my door. I called out softly, "Mira," but only silence answered me. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, almost rhythmic. Reluctantly, I slid out of bed and crept toward the door. I flung it open to reveal a sight that froze me in place. A single, faded photograph lay on the threshold. In the sepia-toned image, a family stood before the very cabin we'd taken refuge in, a mother, father, and a small girl. Their eyes were strangely vacant, yet each face bore a distinct expression of sorrow. The back of the photo bore a date from nearly a century ago. My mind raced. Had someone left it there? I called for Mira, and together we examined the photo. Myra's face went pale as she recognized the little girl. It was the daughter of the family that had vanished. As we debated whether to call someone, a soft knock echoed from the back door. It was tentative, almost pleading. We exchanged glances and crept toward the door. With trembling hands, I opened it to reveal nothing but the swirling fog of dawn outside. Yet, in the mist, I glimpsed a figure standing at the edge of the trees, a slender silhouette, too distant to discern any features but unmistakably human. We spent the rest of the morning in a daze, uneasy about the inexplicable events. We decided to leave the cabin immediately, our plans for a quiet getaway shattered by the haunting presence of the past. While packing up, Mira discovered a stack of old letters tucked behind a loose brick in the fireplace. The letters were written in delicate, looping script, recounting tales of despair and betrayal. One letter mentioned that the little girl in the photo was believed to be the victim of a terrible curse, doomed to wander the cabin's halls until the truth of her demise was revealed. The letter ended with a plea for forgiveness, a plea that sent a shiver down my spine. We drove away with the rising sun, the memory of that eerie night lingering in every shadow and every creak of our old car. At home, I couldn't shake the feeling that the cabin had imprinted something onto me, a lingering presence that whispered in quiet moments. I began to notice small anomalies, a familiar lullaby drifting through my mind when I was alone, an inexplicable chill when I passed by old family photos, even dreams in which I walked the halls of that decaying cabin. Weeks later, as autumn painted the trees with fiery hues, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. The envelope was thick, handmade, and carried the same faded handwriting as the letters from the cabin. I opened it with a sense of dread and curiosity. Inside was a single page, its edges brittle with age, stating, "To break the curse, you must return. The truth lies in the forgotten corners of the past." No signature, no further explanation. I tried to dismiss it as an elaborate prank, but the words gnawed at me relentlessly. Mira tried to dissuade me, warning that reopening that chapter could lead to more pain, but my mind was already made up. I planned to return to the cabin, determined to uncover its secrets and put an end to the haunting presence that had followed me since that night. The drive back felt surreal, as if the landscape itself was urging me onward. I arrived at the clearing at dusk, the cabin looming as ominously as ever. This time, I was not alone. Mira insisted on accompanying me, her earlier trepidation replaced by resolve to help me break the cycle. Together, we stepped inside. The interior was just as we had left it, frozen in time with its faded remnants of past lives. We began our search methodically, scouring every nook and cranny, peeling back layers of dust and memory. In the attic, behind a collapsed bookshelf, we found a hidden compartment containing a diary. Its brittle pages recounted the tragic story of the family, a secret forbidden love, a betrayal that led to an unspeakable act, and a curse that was cast upon the innocent child as a means of eternal punishment. The diary ended abruptly, its final words smeared with what looked like tears. Only through truth can redemption be found. As we pieced together the fragments of history, the cabin's oppressive silence seemed to thicken. In the dead of night, the old structure creaked and moaned as though burdened with centuries of sorrow. At the stroke of midnight, the door to the attic slowly swung open on its own, and a chill wind swept through the space. We stood there, hearts pounding, as a soft, sorrowful voice began to sing that same haunting lullaby. Then, in a twist that shattered all our expectations, the voice spoke clearly, "I am sorry." The sound was not that of a ghost, but a desperate plea for forgiveness. In that moment, the temperature dropped, and the shadows seemed to coalesce into a figure, a translucent little girl, eyes wide with grief and regret. She reached out a trembling hand, as if pleading for release from a torment that had bound her soul for far too long. Mira and I exchanged a look of both terror and compassion. "We're here to help," I managed to say softly. The ghostly child's eyes darted between us before a single tear slid down her cheek. In that instant, the air shifted, and the oppressive weight of the cabin lifted slightly, replaced by a fragile hope. We spent hours in the attic, reading the diary aloud, reciting the words of remorse and forgiveness as if they were a ritual to break the curse. As the first light of dawn crept through the grimy windows, the apparition began to fade, her features softening into a peaceful smile. The final echo of her voice whispered, "Thank you," and with that, she was gone, released from the eternal cycle of sorrow. Mira and I left the cabin that morning with a profound sense of closure. The experience had changed us, not just through terror, but through the recognition of a truth buried deep in the past, a truth that sometimes demands to be uncovered so that even the most tormented souls might find rest. Even now, when I pass a lonely stretch of forest road or hear the soft strains of a lullaby in the wind, I remember that fateful night. And though the memory of the cabin remains etched in my mind, I no longer feel the chill of dread. Instead, I carry with me the lesson that even in the darkest corners of our history, there lies a chance for redemption, and sometimes, the truth can set us free. Story 3. I never believed in ghosts. Not really. Sure, I'd heard stories, and I'd seen enough horror movies to know what to expect from a haunted house, but those were just stories, nothing real, nothing that could actually happen. That was before I took the job at the Oakwood Inn. The place was old, one of those historic bed and breakfasts tucked away in the mountains of Pennsylvania. It had been in business since the late 1800s, surviving generations of owners, renovations, and local legends. People swore it was haunted. Employees whispered about guests hearing footsteps in empty hallways, voices in locked rooms, even the occasional sighting of something that shouldn't be there. I ignored all of it. I needed the job. I was hired as a night receptionist, working the front desk from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., when the place was at its quietest. It wasn't bad, just a little boring. Most nights, I sat at the desk, answered the occasional late-night phone call, and made sure no drunk guests wandered where they shouldn't. But on my third night, things changed. Around 1 a.m., I heard footsteps from the upper floor. Slow, deliberate. The inn only had 5 rooms, and only 2 were booked that night. Both guests had already gone to bed. I checked the monitor that showed the upstairs hallway. Nothing. I figured maybe the pipes were settling, or maybe the old wooden floors were just shifting. I went back to my book, trying not to let my imagination get the better of me. Then the phone rang. I nearly jumped out of my chair. The caller ID showed the extension from room 304, one of the empty rooms. A chill ran through me as I hesitated before answering. "Front desk," I said. At first, silence. Then, a voice whispering, "You shouldn't be here." I slammed the phone down, my heart pounding. It had to be a prank. Someone had to be messing with me. I grabbed the master key and made my way upstairs, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit by antique sconces. I reached room 304 and placed my hand on the doorknob. The moment I touched it, the knob turned on its own. I yanked my hand back, my breath catching in my throat. The door creaked open an inch, just enough to reveal darkness inside. Hello. My voice sounded small. The door slammed shut in response. I didn't stay to investigate. I turned and bolted back downstairs, locking myself in the office. I told myself I had imagined it, that the old building was playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The rest of the night was uneventful, though I couldn't stop checking the monitor, waiting to see something that wasn't there before. The next morning, I told my manager about it. He gave me a tired smile and said, "You're not the first." Then, he told me the story. Decades ago, the Oakwood Inn had been a private home. A man named Thomas Mercer had lived there with his wife and daughter. According to town records, his wife left him, or so he claimed. But his daughter, Emily, was never seen again. Neighbors reported strange noises coming from the house. Crying, screams, but nothing was ever proven. Mercer eventually sold the house and left town, and the new owners converted it into the inn. Years later, during renovations, workers discovered a small door hidden behind a bookshelf in what became room 304. The space behind it was barely large enough for a child to fit inside. Inside, they found a single doll and bones. I quit that morning. But even now, I dream of the Oakwood Inn. And when I wake up, I swear I can still hear a voice whispering, "You shouldn't be here." Story 4. I never liked driving at night, especially through long stretches of empty highway. Something about the dark, the loneliness, the way the roads stretched on endlessly, it always unsettled me. But my job required a lot of travel, and I had gotten used to the long, solitary drives. That is, until that night. It was past midnight when I found myself on an unfamiliar highway in the middle of nowhere. My GPS had rerouted me due to construction, sending me down a two-lane road surrounded by endless trees. The only signs of civilization were the occasional, run-down gas stations, long since closed for the night. I told myself it was just another drive, just another lonely stretch of road. Then I saw the car. It was pulled over on the side of the road, hazard lights flashing. At first, I barely noticed it, just another broken-down vehicle. But as I passed, I caught a glimpse of something that made my stomach drop. The driver's side door was open, and there was no one inside. I slowed down instinctively, my headlights illuminating the dark road ahead. I glanced at my rearview mirror, expecting to see someone stepping out from behind the car, maybe waving me down for help. There was no one. Something about the scene felt wrong. I kept driving. Faster now, my hands gripping the wheel tighter. A mile passed, then another, and then the same car appeared on the side of the road. Hazard lights flashing. Door open. I nearly slammed on the brakes. I had just passed it. There was no way I had looped around. I checked my GPS. The route hadn't changed. I was still heading straight. I sped up. The trees blurred past me, my breath coming in short gasps. My heart pounded in my ears. I told myself I was imagining things, that exhaustion was making me see things that weren't there. But then, the car appeared again. This time, something had changed. The driver's seat was no longer empty. There was someone sitting there, head tilted down, unmoving. I couldn't see their face, only the silhouette, barely visible in the glow of my headlights. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving. But as I passed, I saw it. The figure lifted its head and smiled. Not a normal smile. Not a friendly smile. Too wide. Too wrong. Too unnatural. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor. I didn't care about speed limits. Didn't care if my GPS wanted me to take another turn. I just needed to get away. The road stretched endlessly ahead. No signs, no turns, just that oppressive line of trees pressing in from both sides. Then, my headlights flickered. The road in front of me went dark for a split second. And in that moment, I felt it. Something in the back seat. I didn't turn around. I didn't check the mirror. I just drove. Faster. Faster. The headlights came back on. The road reappeared, but I felt it. Breathing. Behind me. Shallow. Slow. Then, a whisper. Not words. Just a sound. Close to my ear. I didn't think. I just reacted. I yanked the wheel, swerving violently, nearly losing control as my tires screeched against the pavement. The car fishtailed, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought I was going to crash. Then silence. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. The road behind me was dark. No car. No flashing hazard lights. Just the endless stretch of highway. I didn't stop. Not until I saw the first sign of life, a gas station, glowing in the distance like a beacon. I pulled in, parked under the bright fluorescent lights, and sat there, shaking. I don't know how long I stayed there, gripping the wheel with white-knuckled hands, staring at my own reflection in the mirror. Eventually, I got back on the road, but I never drove that way again, and I never drive at night if I can help it, because sometimes I still see it. In the distance, on the side of the road, hazard lights flashing. Story 5. It started with a whisper. Not the wind through the trees, not the creak of the old house settling. A whisper. Low, breathless, just behind me. I turned sharply, expecting to see someone standing in my bedroom doorway. There was nothing. I stood there for a long time, heart hammering in my chest. The room was still, only the soft hum of the fan and the dim glow of my bedside lamp offering any sign of life. I told myself I had imagined it, that my tired brain was playing tricks on me. Then it happened again, right against my ear. You shouldn't be here. I spun so fast that I nearly tripped over myself. Still nothing. But I felt it. The air had changed. The room was colder. My skin prickled, a crawling sensation running down my spine. I wasn't alone. It had only been a week since I moved into the house. A small, cheap rental in an old neighborhood, a place that seemed too good to be true. And maybe it was. The landlord had been eager to get a tenant, practically begging me to take it. I should have questioned why the rent was so low. I should have asked why the house had been vacant for so long. But I didn't. And now, I was paying for it. The whispers started on my second night. At first, I thought it was the wind slipping through the old windows, the way air can sometimes create the illusion of voices. But it was too distinct, too deliberate. The voice always spoke in fragments, never quite loud enough to hear the full message. You don't belong. Get out. She's watching. I didn't know who she was, but I felt her. At night, the shadows stretched too far, pooling in the corners where the light couldn't reach. Sometimes, I would wake up to my bedroom door slightly ajar, even though I always closed it. In the dreams, they were the worst part. I dreamed of a woman, pale, gaunt, her skin stretched too thin over her bones. She never moved, never spoke. She just stood there, at the foot of my bed, her dark eyes locked onto mine, watching, waiting. And when I woke up, the sheets were pulled halfway off the bed. I started sleeping with the lamp on, but the shadows still moved. 3 days ago, I decided to check the attic. I don't know what compelled me to do it, some desperate need for answers, maybe. The house was old, and I thought maybe I would find something, some explanation for the unease that had settled in my bones. The attic door was in the hallway ceiling, one of those old pull-down ladders. It took some effort to yank it open, dust cascading down as the hinges groaned. I climbed up, flashlight gripped in my sweaty hand. The air was stifling, thick with dust and something else. A smell, faintly sweet, sickly, rotten. I swept the light across the attic. It was mostly empty, save for a few scattered boxes, old furniture covered in white sheets. Then I saw it. A small wooden chest shoved into the farthest corner. It looked old, older than the house itself. The wood was dark, warped with age, and the metal clasps were rusted shut. I hesitated. Something inside me screamed not to touch it. But my hands moved on their own. The latch broke easily, crumbling under my grip. The lid groaned as I pushed it open, revealing the contents inside. Dolls. Not porcelain or plastic, handmade. Fabric stitched together, dozens of them, each one with black button eyes and little stitched mouths. Some were missing limbs. Some had their faces half-torn, as if they had been chewed. And at the very bottom, there was a bundle of fabric, wrapped tightly in string. I picked it up, heart pounding. It was soft, the texture wrong under my fingers. I pulled the string loose, and the fabric fell away. Inside, there were bones. Small, fragile, a child's bones. That night, the whispers turned into screams. I woke up gasping, my ears ringing, my room ice cold. The lamp flickered violently, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. And then, the closet door creaked open. Slowly, painfully, my breath caught in my throat. She was standing there, not in my dream, not in a nightmare. She was real, thin, motionless. Her face stretched into something that barely resembled human. Her black eyes locked onto mine, and her lips moved. No sound came out, but I understood exactly what she was saying. You found it. Then, she lunged. I don't remember leaving the house. I don't remember running down the street, barefoot, heart slamming against my ribs. The next thing I knew, I was in my car, speeding down the empty road, watching the house shrink in my rearview mirror. I never went back. I left everything behind, my furniture, my clothes. None of it mattered. I don't care about the money I lost. I don't care that I still have nightmares. Because at least now, when I wake up, she's not standing at the foot of my bed.